So welcome, and my name is Roberto Mancone. I'm a Chief Operating Officer of we.trade, and together with me I have two members of the Board of Directors of the company. You want to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. Not working? Good afternoon? No. Okay, here I go. Good afternoon. My name is Chantal van Houten. I'm active within KBC Bank Belgium, and part of the project team since the very beginning of this very interesting, challenging project, and happy to tell more about we.trade in a while with you.
Good afternoon. My name is Anne-Claire Gorge. So I'm from Société Générale, Global Head of Products and Innovation within the Trade Finance business line, and I'm also a board member of we.trade. And it's a pleasure to be here. So just before we start, I'm absolutely not an IT woman.
Nor am I.
So we both have a business background, but we'll do our best to tell you the reason why we decided to launch this project.
Okay, so we will try to tell you a little bit our story, why we did this, and where we stand at this point is something that we want to share with you. Before going into the we.trade, I mean, obviously, probably we don't need to teach you anything. This kind of audience, if it's here because of Hyperledger, I guess you know everything about blockchain, so we don't have to spend so much time on that. But a couple of items that probably you know for sure we wanted to guide you through is that a lot of things are happening in the market. So it's not only we.trade, but a lot of companies, famous companies also are investing heavily in blockchain, being smart cities, being in logistics, being in shared economies, as you can see, and you recognize some very important names behind, which for us means that there is a fundamental pattern compared to what happens in the last year. In the last year, and I mean last year for us is 2018, part of 17, you can see all these different sectors where you see a lot of collaboration happening around. In banking, and we are an example, in trade finance, but you can see also in several other fields, industries, sectors, and that means, of course, there is a systematic approach towards understanding, can we use blockchain in order to radically change the way the business has been happening until today. And if these are the sectors, then we just give you here some examples of names. Of course, we place ourselves, we.trade, we.trade as an example of something that is no longer a proof of concept. It's not something that may or may not happen, but something that was developed, is available in the market, and we will discuss with Chantal and Claire later on. But for us, it was particularly important also to underline that in all those segments and sectors, as you can see, there are important names, right? The names that, of course, you know, in the insurance sector, but also in the food safety, in the logistics, in the supply chain, many of these names and many of these projects probably you're already aware. What it means is that there is a fundamental pool of resources, and there is a fundamental shift in investment made by big names. This is not anymore somebody in the garage trying to develop a solution or a startup and FinTech and see if it works. Here we have the big players in each single industry that are putting heavy resources in this, and this inevitably will change the business models that these companies are operating. The result, and here maybe I have the first question for Claire and Chantal, is that just since 2017, so in 1 year, as you can see, there's been almost an increase in engineers, and blockchain engineers, developers, by almost 400%. Good for the kids and good for the people, of course, develop this kind of expertise. They're making a lot of money. I think now a developer earns almost $175,000 to $200,000 or euro, depends where you work, which is pretty appealing, I would say. But this creates an issue because the demand is so high because of all the projects that you saw before. That means resources are scarce, so only few projects probably are able to go fast. So in this respect, maybe I have the first question for you. How comfortable you are that we have the right resources in developing what we are developing?
I would say that the reason why the consortium, so at the beginning 7 banks and then 9 banks and now 12 banks, decided not to develop the solution by themselves, but to go to an external provider with resources and skills in this field. So we decided to launch a RFP at the very beginning of the project. And we, after a strict selection, in fact, we decided to go with IBM and to ask IBM to develop the solution. So IBM is a strong partner. And we believe, and we could see that they were able to develop the solution in a short period of time with a good level of quality.
So basically, we are outsourcing as we trade basically the resources. So we have a stable partner that systematically develops the platform, but also develops all the future releases that we are going to develop, and I'm sure we can touch that, right?
So we obviously have skills within the different banks, and we could work together with IBM because we had especially skilled architects working with IBM, but we didn't need to have developers within the bank for the solution.
Yeah, this is an important point that maybe we want to share with you. We don't know exactly from which sector you come, but I mean, what Claire mentioned is absolutely important. So basically, we have the domain expert, which is trade finance experts. And these are provided, of course, by the 12 banks. And they're absolutely key valuable assets. So we know how trade finance has performed in the past. We know what are the pain points. And then started from the pain points, the typical process was, okay, well, this is the way we would like to re-engineer. And then we try to use, of course, blockchain in order to change the model traditionally. So moving forward, sorry, I went too fast. Maybe I have a question for Chantal. So if this is true, so we have this expertise in international trade, trade finance, the banks. So why did we do this? Maybe you want to explain to the audience what it was the starting point that made us believe.
Yeah, I think the starting point.
Is it you?
I don't know what's happening. Okay. The starting point for this we.trade story was, in fact, customer needs. It's not about the technology, but what are currently customer needs. And let me share you a story, how it all started. In fact, it was an idea of a customer that shared with us that one of his needs was not really covered in the current way that banks service their customers. A small potato grower in Belgium who wanted to export his potato products into France. And he said, well, basically, normally, I, as an exporter, I don't want to take the risk and deliver goods, ship my goods to anybody. I do not know. So he doesn't want to take the payment, the default risk, right? So he said, if you could build me a solution where I can send my truck to this customer in Lyon, he can see my goods, he's okay with it, and then he can push on a button on his smartphone, and then automatically the payment is sent to my bank account, and I'm perfectly happy. So it's the same, it's crossing at the same time, in fact. And with that idea in mind, we were thinking, okay, and then we had our blockchain experts in the bank, evangelists telling us about all the potential this blockchain technology would offer. Then we were thinking, hey, this is perhaps an opportunity to build something where we can help our customers. And addressing the pain points of small and medium-sized companies was the key motivation to build the platform. Where we see, as I said, we have a catch-22 position. Will I take the risk and send the goods and wait for the invoice to be paid as a seller? Or will I ask for prepayment, but then the buyer needs to take the risk? So this is a catch-22 position, and potentially the business could be turned down. But as a bank, we do have solutions today to cover those type of risks. But we notice that in the European context, in the European way of working, they're not being used by companies because letters of credit, documentary collections, they're too cumbersome, complex, expensive, and too slow because they're paper-based. The documents need to physically be shipped to one bank, then to another bank, be verified, and then go to the final destination. So basically, in Europe, the flow of the documents would be too slow, the goods would arrive sooner. So it wouldn't work. And that's why we said, okay, with the blockchain technology, we have lots of advantages. And perhaps we can share the next slide. We had a very nice video, but the sound is not working, so we're not going to show it.
Before we go there, you were talking about the complexity, right? You say it's cumbersome and everything. There are a couple of slides maybe I want to show and then ask you as a trade expert, I mean, maybe we can explain better the intricacy. On purpose, you don't need to read each single name, but the goal is just to show that in normal trade ecosystems, as you can see, there are lots of players. It's a very complicated structure. Shippers, importers, exporters, insurers, freight forwarders, customs, port authorities, banks, you name it, right? And then when you have so many players, this is what happens, right? This chart is even worse than the previous one. But it's on purpose, and good luck for you if you can read all the points there. But it shows exactly, we can explain. So on top, you have all the players, the one that we mentioned before, importer, exporter, so forth. Then you have the documents, and then you have the data. So, and Claire, from your point of view, if this is the complicated structure, if this is a complicated structure where the players start from, is this the reason why we develop we.trade, and is this the reason why we use DLT as smart contract?
This is the reason, but I'll try to explain why. In fact, the question I wanted to ask to Chantal previously is, okay, your client has a need, you want to fulfill this need, but why don't you find a solution on your own? So the answer is the previous slide. In fact, we can't, in trade finance, we want to finance trade transactions, meaning that we are not alone, our client is not alone doing trade transactions. So we need to connect the dots. We need to find a solution to go through those different key players. And for the moment, the solution is to use paper, because paper is universal. Okay, so everybody can understand a sheet of paper. Sometimes you may face a question with the language, but you can read it. In any case, you can read it. So the question is, if you want to build a solution to digitize this, you can't do it alone. You need to create a network. And when we start speaking about networks, then we start understanding the reason why we look at blockchain technology. The second reason why we need, or we thought it was a good idea to look at DLTs, was that you can see that there are very different kind of players here. And why would one category of players here trust the other category? Why should I, as a shipping line, trust a bank to manage the documents I need to issue or I need to receive to operate my the trade transaction of my client? Why, as a bank, should I trust another bank or a FinTech as it's a strategic activity for me? So there is a question around the question of trusted third party. So we can't afford putting all those data in the hands of one single party. It's not possible. And that's the reason why we thought that distributed ledger technologies could be a right answer to the question we had.
So maybe you want to, sorry. So basically, if I go to Chantal, that works,
yes.
Right? So basically you're saying, and Claire, that from this situation where at the bottom you see all the data, which can be documents, invoices, packing lists, bill of lading, as correctly and Claire was mentioning, there is a lot of replication of these documents, sometimes forgeries, sometimes error, operating risk, obviously, behind that. And there is always a one-to-many transfer of all this data. So moving towards the DLT, what is the difference?
Yeah, instead of transmitting the documents, the paper-based documents or data, let's say, if in kind of electronic form, from one party to another and duplicate it and send it in several times to several parties, with a blockchain technology, we can now have one shared database where only the parties that need to have access, that are related to one single trade transaction, have the accessibility to this information and have access to the same information. So on the platform, a trade is recorded on the blockchain and where the buyer and seller have access to the same information. And only the related banks in that transaction, the buyer's banks to execute finally the transaction, and a seller bank when he gives a financial service, they also have accessibility to those data. So it's all about efficiency, transparency, digitizing a trade, but not only about replicating the current way of working. And I think that is really crucial, that because another advantage is not only the shared database, it's also the use of smart contracts. And perhaps we can explain it with this slide. So for the people that know a little bit trade finance, as banks, our service is to guarantee a payment when documents are compliant with terms stipulated in a SWIFT message, in the letter of credit it's called. So we check documents, and the documents, when they're compliant, they are the key to the money transfer. By using the smartphone contract, we will now step away from the doc checking, the paper. We go to event-based payment triggers. So events will trigger the payment. And the events we now included in the smart contract on the current platform version, they have 2 blocks. It's around the invoice, a transaction, the invoice sent by the seller or accepted by the buyer. And optionally, you can combine it with the goods delivery. The goods delivery, which can be confirmed by a third neutral party, which is a transporter. We build an API, an interface with the transport, the courier companies. Or it could be done by the buyer, for example, or the seller that the goods have been shipped. So remember, coming back to the story of the potato grower, here we have the fact that if you as a supplier, you upload your invoice, you send to your invoice, and your customer for the first transaction is happy to see the goods and then says, okay, I received the goods, that means the we.trade contract will send the instruction to the buyer's bank to execute the payment. It's not a cryptocurrency payment, and the payment is done outside the platform, to be clear.
True. The payments are, for the moment at least, made by the banks. We have the benefit, of course, to have shareholders and users, which are banks. So at the beginning, it didn't make any sense to build a P2P payment in the platform. After we have this kind of very high-level view and everything, do you want to guide quickly, maybe to show how the user experience, the user interface is built, so at least we give a sense. We're not going through the demo, but just to give a sense of the usability and the friendliness of the platform that we built.
So again, to go back to the starting point of the project, we wanted to offer a simple solution to clients which currently don't have access to a simple solution, meaning that we wanted to enable SMEs to secure and finance their trade transactions without having to be an expert in trade finance. Currently, if you want to issue a letter of credit or to be the beneficiary of a letter of credit, you need to start with a training session and a long training session. Here you can see that it seems, and it is, in fact, plug and play. In fact, it's very easy. So what does we.trade? So this is the customer dashboard. We'll revert to other screens after this. So what does the platform currently offer? So again, Roberto mentioned the fact that it's not a proof of concept. It's not a pure idea. We are showing slides today, but we could show a demo of the platform. We have clients on the platform. So what are the services currently offered by banks using we.trade? The first level of service is purely a service between the buyer and the seller. So meaning that, in fact, this platform is basically mainly a trade platform and not only a trade finance platform. What does it offer? A simple way for the buyer and the seller to agree on the terms of a kind of purchase order, in fact, the terms of a trade transaction, and the conditions upon which the payment will be triggered. So the events Chantal was referring to. What does it bring to the buyer and the seller? Transparency. Where do we stand on the trade transaction? Follow-up, and auto-settlement of the payments, so conditional payments. So this is the very first service where previously you couldn't see any bank on the chart, okay? Only the buyer and the seller. Then, in case the exporter is not comfortable with the credit risk of the buyer, the bank of the importer, of the buyer, can add its guarantee to the payment, meaning that the payment will be made whatever the situation of the buyer is at maturity date of the payment. So the bank may add the guarantee, the payment guarantee. And the third service the platform currently offers is access to finance, meaning that the bank of the exporter may finance the deferred payments if the buyer and the seller agreed on deferred payments. So this is operational, available to clients currently.
Yes, correct. And this is only the starting point. So this is the starting version. And our intention is to add more types of services, bank services, but also other services. Perhaps we can have a look at some other screenshots. So the first one was a dashboard. So you can see a company logs on, gets access to the we.trade platform through one of the member banks. He will then see the life cycle of his transactions. You start with the input of the purchase order, and then the next step will be when the goods are delivered, are ready for shipment, the seller will make the invoice, and all the steps until the payment of the invoice are reflected on the platform. Here is a screenshot where when the seller wants to register the transaction, he will click on the green button, create a trade, and then first he will select his counterparty, and then the next step you see here is the transaction details he will start in different screens to fill out. So you can see here the currency, the amount, of course, and then there's also an upload functionality. Our customers told us it would be really nice, even not everything is digital yet or integrated in this flow, but if we could add like a digital archive or packing list or invoice or transport document, that would be very useful for us. Knowing that, and hopefully that in a later stage we will have more actors on the platform and more documents. And here's a step where you can see that the seller confirms that the invoice is sent. He can also upload the invoice in another format. And the seller also confirms that the goods are ready for shipment. And you can see all the transaction details, very intuitive. You can click on and see all the details of a transaction.
Maybe one thing that is important before we move forward, and probably is connected to the next slide, what has to be clear that whatever the steps that we mentioned before, so the two traders meeting each other on the platform, the two traders either requiring a guarantee of financing of the invoices and therefore triggering a payment, all this happens in the platform. All this automatically generates a smart contract. So the front end that you see here, any click automatically creates an automatic code in the smart contract, records the transactions, which is for the characteristics, it's immutable, distributed, auditable, and so forth. And it's a standard for all the banks. So all the banks that are right now are licensing this platform, which are 14 banks, they will use the same, which means also for the clients, no matter which bank they deal with, they will have always the same customer experience. And I think probably this, we can go forward in the cooperation, is the fundamental kind of revolution, if we want, right? The fact that banks are willing to share the same platform, the same customer experience, so it becomes more, I would say, a client-centric view from the fact that the client doesn't matter which banks deal with, as long as the we.trade clients has the same experience. So do you want to share a little bit the partnership model? What are the reasons that brought us there, and what are the plus and minuses?
Yeah, so perhaps KBC should start because they were at the very beginning of the project, so I let the floor.
Yes, it started with a blank sheet of paper, some ideas, as I told the story of the potato grower that gave us inspiration. We built a proof of concept, like most of us will start the project with, made a nice little video of John Beer, the exporter, to a French customer, Boisson, and then we won some awards, got some traction and interest in the market. And then we saw that banks in countries around Belgium were also interested, were also looking at solutions in the trade finance space. And then all of a sudden we said, well, why not bring all the banks together for a meeting in Brussels? Huh? And then on an October day we all met and we all had the same idea, okay, let's go for it, let's do it together. The intention to start with a collaboration. And then it grew from a collaboration. We did an RFP. We make the assessment of the technology, selected our IT partner. As said, we built on Hyperledger Fabric with IBM, and then grew from a collaboration into a formal establishment of a joint venture company in Ireland. And that's where Roberto is active as our CEO today. So that's really, I think, a nice accomplishment we have.
It's also a fundamental difference, if I may, not to sound aggressive, but I mean, you probably have heard and you hear about a lot of consortiums, right? People still call us a consortium, but in reality we are a legal entity, right? There is the fundamental difference. Consortium is a lot of people gathering together trying to achieve something. I think we are beyond that stage. So we started as a consortium, And the banks now are real shareholders with vested interests in the company that they represent, with a proper organizational model, with proper reporting line, governance, board of directors, so there are clear definition and investments made by these shareholders, which of course implies the fact that we.trade at this point, which is live in the market, has to work. The clients have to be satisfied. So it's not anymore, like you said before, it's not anymore a proof of concept, let's see if it happens. But now there is a fiduciary responsibility of a company that is launching something in the market through the banks, which have, of course, a reputational issue, and ultimately to the clients that have to be satisfied. So maybe this is not a light difference compared between consortium and legal entity now, right? I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, and to elaborate a bit more on that, so obviously we created a company, so we have an established company which is responsible for the service delivered to banks. We have a business model, so we recently onboarded Eurobank in Greece, which joined as a client of the platform without being a shareholder, which is the future of the platform. In fact, to have more and more banks using the platform without necessarily having to invest in the capital of the company. But we also have this can seem obvious, but it's a very important asset. We have a rule book, meaning that we have a clear legal framework to manage those services. So again, it's not only slides, it's a real product. And perhaps a quick word on Hyperledger, because we mentioned the fact that we cooperate on this platform. Obviously, we put resources together to build this in a very short period of time, because we started in January 2017, and we went live in June or July this year. So believe me, for banks, it's just amazing. It never happens. But we cooperate, but we are competitors on the markets. And we have sometimes several banks per country, and every single bank on this map intends to develop the service in other countries. So we will definitely be competitors, offering we.trade to the same clients in the same countries. So just coming back to Hyperledger, one very important aspect of the architecture of this platform and the features of this platform was confidentiality, and the fact that we could make sure that data was shared only when it had to be shared, and only with the banks which had to get the data. And this was enabled by Hyperledger Fabric.
Yeah. So if we look backward 1 year, right? I mean, we were almost 1 year ago in Toronto. The company did not exist yet, so we were all lined up with the current directors and many new, and we just made a promise. We showed the slides. You probably, Claire, you were there, right? With me in Toronto, if I remember correctly. So we were showing this slide, which was a pretty bold statement to say, we're going to do this. Right? We didn't change this slide. This is exactly this. Fortunately, I can say we did it, because as you said, we said we were going to build a company in February, we did it. We say we're going to go in production in July, we did it. We say we're going to expand and reach scale, and from 7 banks, now we have 12 shareholders and 14 licensing banks. And then we say that we're going also to expand beyond, and something happened, right, this year. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yes, already a nice step. So, as said, we're focusing clearly on Europe because of the open account business, which is really crucial in that space. But we know there are very important and potential, there are today very important trade corridors with Asia. And that's why a lot of our customers are very interested to have connections, to have access to Asian suppliers, and do business via a platform and use trade finance services. And instead of adding more banks there locally, we thought it would be more interesting to set up a collaboration, and that has been established a couple of months ago, let's say. You were there, Roberto, you can see him on the picture. So there has been an MOU signed for collaboration with an existing platform, e.trade Connect, which connects already 12 Asian banks based in Hong Kong.
So if I go back to this chart, if now I challenge you, right? I mean, now we're in December 18, and you want to draw a similar chart for 19. What do you think is going to happen in 19?
So in 19, there are different aspects. So we need to onboard more banks, as we need to make we.trade a common product in Europe. In fact, we want, any exporter, any importer in Europe being able to tell their trade partner, well, how do you want to pay me? How do you want to get paid? And the answer could be through we.trade. We want to use we.trade, and everybody would know what we.trade is as a common product, as a common solution. So for that, we need to onboard more banks to have a minimum reach in the different countries where we already are, and to add new countries, especially in Central Europe. So we are working on that, and new banks will onboard we.trade in 2019. That's the first aspect. Then we are currently working on adding new features. And for this, the collaboration with our current clients using the platform is key. I mean, we started with a MVP, a minimum viable product, which is quite nice for a minimum viable product, but still, it is not complete. We still need to add new features, and we do this in close collaboration with our clients. So we will pursue this effort, and what's at the very center of this slide is the cooperation with the physical supply chain world. So we need to cooperate with players in the world of the physical supply chain, and to see how to better follow and track the goods, and to better comfort importers, on the fact that what was shipped was what was ordered.
Yeah, and maybe moving forward to this slide, connecting what you said. I mean, we announced yesterday that as we.trade, we also became an Hyperledger member, and we think we owe that because obviously we have used, allow me to say, Hyperledger, Fabric through IBM, but basically we built our platform on Hyperledger and Fabric. So after using it, then we thought already after 1 year it's time to give back. So we became also a member together with more than 250 members, and it is important because if at the beginning of the story, we showed all those investments that many banks, companies, sectors, industry are doing. Then we strongly believe in this concept of network. On the right, you have we.trade, and like I'm clear, we have a clear commitment to increase the network of banks and the clients, and of course, usability of the platform. But the more we do that, we constantly look at the market and see what else is happening, because a logistic solution, of course, can be connected to us, manufacturing, provenance, insurances. We always look carefully, and of course, any kind of platform or solution that is developed on Hyperledger inevitably will simplify the connection and discussion and dialogues, and therefore creating the real concept of ecosystem. So this is the picture that we have presented many times. I think moving to Hyperledger as a member is one step. How fast you believe, just to conclude, how fast you believe it is a visionary thinking, or considering how fast the investments are happening lately is not something that will take decades to happen from your point of view?
That's a difficult question, Roberto. And it's not only depending on us, it depends on how fast the others evolve, right? So now I think we all heard today that there is a lot going on, but lots of projects are still in the proof of concept. Not all are really in production phase yet. We also need market adoption. It's not only that you're in production, that you have already a huge market adoption. So I think that will still take time. And we've seen more studies that I think we're at the beginning. There has been hype and we're going down, but then we need to gradually now bring it in the market and make it happen. So, but give us some time for that. Some years, how many? I can't tell.
No, but it's happening. All these logos are popping up, and as I said, there are important logos behind, so I trust, of course, they will look for a good return on investment. Should we, I don't know, do we have time in case somebody has a questions? I don't know how we're looking with the time. Should we allow the audience? Please. If you don't mind passing it.
Yeah. You mentioned that you already built a platform, it's in production. Are you following any standards like GS1 or any kind of data standard? Because you're also talking about interoperating or signing an MOU with the Asian network. And also, of course, you showed another slide which showed possible link-ups with other networks, which means network of networks. So what kind of standards are you following that would allow this to happen without too much trouble?
It's more of a technical question, but I try to answer in a way. I think what we've seen today is that, of course, inevitably there are a lot of initiatives that are following their own structure. Even the one that we did with the memorandum of understanding with Hong Kong, just to give you an idea, first of all, it's not even the same vendor. That is Pingyan, the Chinese IT conglomerate, in our case is IBM. But deliberately, we're thinking that each initiative needs to grow at their own speed. And then the most important issue is, do we have a standard? If not, how can we create that? I can tell you right now, we're already in sprint 2 of this analysis with Asia, with Hong Kong. And the first goal, I think, we always look at what are the products that we have in common. Because inevitably, some platforms will have, first of all, some products that have in common. And then we try to build a connection among those products that we both have, instead of trying to realign the whole line. Then once we have that, then we analyze, do we have the same standard? If not, what can we do in order to create the communication and flow of data? And sometimes you have to accept compromise, building some sort of API infrastructure instead of necessarily trying to talk about interoperability, because that could make your platform extremely complicated if you try to go that route.
Yeah, talking about the existing standards that are there, GS1 or something like that.
I wanted to add something on that. It's a very interesting question because this project and all the projects in this field intend at the end to connect the physical supply chain with the financial supply chain in a seamless way, which again was previously done through the use of paper. So now we need digital standards. So we need standards, and there are standards on the market, but previously or as of now, we have standards, for corporates to communicate together in certain fields. So, for example, in certain industries, you've got some standards to exchange invoices, purchase order. In certain industries, you've got standards regarding the transport. In banking, you've got other standards, and they don't communicate to each other. And just to illustrate this, when I joined, when I started in my position, in fact 4 years ago, we were only focusing on standards between banks and corporates. And now we are looking at that, and during the last 2 days, 2 people from my team spent 2 days in a pure supply chain event without any bank in the event, just to try to better understand this world. Because in fact, it's a question of connecting different worlds which didn't used to talk to each other. So obviously, there are standards such as GS1, and we should look at how to integrate them into platforms such as we.trade.
Garrett Dittman with IBM Research. I'm curious about the business model. Do the owning banks who own we.trade, are they actually interested in you turning a profit, or is their main motivation to provide the service that they founded the company for? And actually also, how do you charge participants on your platform?
Maybe I give you an answer as COO, and then I let them as investor eventually to give a probably different view. So as a COO, the business model is very simple, right? It's a licensing model. So the shareholders are also licensing bank, which means the ownership of the IP, the intellectual property, the ownership of the platform sits with we.trade, the legal entity which is created. And then we.trade license the solution to all the banks, including the shareholders and also the non-shareholders. And therefore, you can imagine the license model. There is, of course, the generation of the business model. So this is the very...
Way to the third floor. Closing session will begin in 5 minutes.
Okay, so we have to rush. So basically, so this is a very typical model. The idea, and here maybe I'll let the board representative to talk, is more to create the massive distribution. Therefore, the goal is not necessarily to have return on investment on the profitability and therefore sharing dividends, but to reinvest in the company. But maybe you want to...
In fact, the business model is clearly on the bank side. I mean, on we.trade, the point is to create enough revenue to be able to maintain the platform and to enhance the platform, but that's it. So the profit is on the bank side, and the idea is in fact to re-intermediate a business where we aren't for the moment. So currently, the clients we are targeting, they pay via a simple transfer. So a SEPA credit transfer, as it is called, costs less than €1, okay, a few cents. Through this kind of service, we will charge more because we will offer more services. And that's exactly the business model, to re-intermediate and to bring banks between the buyer and the seller by bringing new services.
If I may add, yes, for us as banks, it's a new distribution channel. Because as said today, the open account trades, which is huge in numbers, in volume, we don't have access to it. We don't have any visibility. And with this platform, the trades are initiated, are recorded on the platform from the beginning, at the time of a purchase order, and we are able to offer our digital services to it. So that's a revenue model for the banks. New business streams, it's not replacing our own business, it's new opportunities.
But there is a clear distinction to your question in terms of almost Chinese wall. So our business model, legal entity, is totally segregated from the business model that each single bank. So some banks maybe decide, I don't know, to increase market share. Some other banks have profitability behind this. That is their decision. Of course, the banks, like Claire before said, they are competitors. So each of them can never share with each other how they intend to present the platform. Okay.
Thank you.